Hello everybody, I am ChoirBoy2020 and welcome to my first ever YouTube video. Lurrus of the Dream Den has been banned. At the time of this recording, it's been about a week since the announcement came to ban Magic's most powerful cat in Modern and Pioneer.
Sorry, Johnny!
Today, I want to take a look at the modern decks that used to play Lurrus and see how they've been impacted, as well as offer up my predictions for how they might change in the future. Finally, I will also take a look at the decks that stand to grow the most in popularity and power from the ban announcement. Since this is recorded about a week after the ban, if I'm right, you should consider liking and subscribing. And if I'm wrong,
Then you suck!
without further ado, let's get into it. Ikoria Lair of Behemoths released on April 17th, 2020. All eyes were drawn to the most important cards from the set, the 10 Companions. One for each two-color pair, each of the Companions offered unique upgrades to decks that adhered to the strict costs of the Companion. Several decks were able to run multiple copies of the same Companion because they fit their own restrictions. Well, 9 of the 10 did. Lurrus was the only one that made it impossible to fit his own Companion restriction. Lots of decks were eager to try them out. Quickly, 2 of the 10 Companions stood head and shoulder above the rest. Lurrus of the Dream Den and Yorion Sky Nomad. Aggressive decks, mid-range decks, and low-mana combo decks were the first to grab Lurrus, and many mid-range and control decks used Yorion to provide additional value and turn the corner from surviving to winning the game. On June 1st, Wizards of the Coast would announce that the Companion rule would change. Instead of allowing you to cast it from the Companion Zone, players would now have to pay 3 mana at sorcery speed to put their Companion into their hand from the Companion Zone, where they would then have to pay its mana cost to cast it. Adding this 3 mana tax to the Companions weakened them substantially, making all but Lurrus and Yorion virtually unplayable because they lack the payoff required to meet their conditions. Despite this change, Lurrus saw a steady increase in play due to the ease of meeting his Companion requirement, especially with newer and more powerful cards being printed that made meeting that requirement even easier. Some decks made the change naturally, like burn decks that rarely, if ever, ran permanents above a mana cost of 2. Other decks made complete overhauls in order to tap into the power and consistency Lurrus provided over a long game. Decks like Jund no longer ran Liliana of the Veil or Bloodbraid Elf simply because Lurrus and a Mishra's Bauble were better. But Lurrus would not go unimpeded forever. March 7th, 2022, just a month shy of 2 full years in Modern, Lurrus of the Dream Den would be banned. Lurrus saw play in many decks. Grixis Death Shadow, Hammer Time, Burn, Prowess, Mill, Bogles, Grixis Control, Dimir Control, Hardened Scales, Jund, Rakdos Midrange, and even decks like Twiddlestorm all played Lurrus as a companion. Some decks fare better than others from the ban. For example, Burn, Prowess, Mill, Hardened Scales, and Bogles all played Lurrus as a companion because they already met the requirements to play it in the deck. Running Lurrus was merely a shot in the arm to these decks, albeit one they never really needed. With these decks, the extent of what they lose from the ban is a staple sideboard card, along with the edge Lurrus gave in the long game. We can expect that these decks will still exist in the metagame without any real change in popularity or power. Aside from the narrow downside of Tasha's Hideous Laughter exiling fewer cards on average as decks slightly increase their mana cost with Lurrus gone. Other decks more heavily constructed themselves around Lurrus. Death Shadow, Hammer Time,
Fuck that deck!
Jund, Dimir, and Grixis Control made significant sacrifices to include the cat. In the end, these decks will also continue to exist in the metagame, though they are weakened by at least some measure. These decks will simply go back to using the cards Lurrus made them sacrifice in order to sign his contract as a companion. Or perhaps there will be new cards that these decks play that they never got to fully explore with Lurrus. Some decks relied rather heavily on Lurrus, Rakdos Midrange being the biggest loser from the ban. While this deck may exist in some regard, I can't imagine it wouldn't be better suited adopting green for Wrenn and 6, Tarmogoyf, Abrupt Decay, Assassin's Trophy, or Bloodbraid Elf, and some Veil of Summers in the sideboard can't hurt.
That means it turns into Jund.
Rakdos midrange has a decent shot of dying for Lurrus's sins. But if it does survive the ban, it would likely be on the back of very powerful effects in Rakdos colors that it would have access to as a counter-meta deck. But again, not every deck used Lurrus. Some of those decks stand to gain popularity significantly, like Amulet Titan, Izzet Murktide Regent, 4-color Blink,
You talk about money, Paul?
Crashing Footfalls, Living End, Tron, Elementals, and Goblin Charbelcher to name a few. Some people worry about the fast combo deck that was at the top of the meta simply being replaced by the next one, but there are options to fight them all the same, both before the ban and after. There has been a bit of worry from some community members that Yorion decks will be the best decks in the format, because they have the best companion available. However, the success of decks like Amulet Titan, Izzet Murktide Regent, Crashing Footfalls, Living End, Tron, and various control decks with Kahira as a companion prove, at least in some regard, that access to a companion is not the most defining factor in whether a deck is competitively viable or not. I suspect we will see an increase in popularity for all of these decks, and we will see a resurgence of most decks that lost the pretty kitty.